Hey there! We're so excited to be here today to film another Exponent mock interview. Exponent helps candidates ace their tech interviews with our online coaching, peer mock interviews, and expert online courses. We publish new mock interviews every week, so be sure to like and subscribe. I'm here today with Lily, a senior product designer based in San Francisco, to do an app critique style mock interview. So, Lily, could you please introduce yourself to those watching?
Hey everyone, it's nice seeing you all. I'm a product designer in San Francisco who has worked for several consumer tech companies here in the Bay, and I'm really excited to share with you all some of the strategies I've used in my interviews, specifically around app critiques. And I was recently interviewing at the early part of this year, so this is all fresh in my mind, and I can't wait to share it with you all.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lily. So why don't we dive into that portion of the mock? So let's pretend that we're doing an app critique of Yelp. How would you navigate that process?
Sure. Yelp connects people with great local businesses, and this is their mission that they state online. Yelp specializes in introducing customers to restaurants, as that was their primary problem that they solve for users. But now they've expanded to other services such as home services, auto services, and more. And when we land on the homepage for Yelp, we see that they have actually rebranded themselves into going beyond just being known for restaurants, as they're making an active effort in showcasing different parts of their experience through large photography as well as through their navigation tool. And when we scroll down, we can see that even though Yelp is making an effort to rebrand itself as something more than just being known for restaurants, they still have kept a lot of their previous activity in regards to people reviewing restaurants and feedback around restaurants in the majority of their page. And then at the bottom, we have other categories that they want to also be known for, which are things like shopping, nightlife, and automotive services. But overall, Yelp is known to be a place where people come and they share their experiences around their local businesses. Usually, when I introduce kind of what the product is doing, I then go ahead and either search for something here or go through different pages to kind of briefly have an introduction to different navigation items. So, for this example, I'll be going into home services, and we can see here for home services, they have different businesses listed here that are top rated in my area. And then when we go into automotive services, they have the same thing. And the layout is pretty similar. We have the large image of the business that the business provides. We have the name of the business. And then, of course, the thing that is Yelp is most known for, which are the reviews itself. And then we have other tags such as family or operated or owned, such as, and also established in what time, and then what they are known for. This is pretty standard across most of their listings. But depending on the type of listing itself, it also has different types. For example, this one has Yelp Guaranteed, which is to assure that the customer, if they're having business with this entity, that they'll have a somewhat good transaction or somewhat of a good relationship and good overall experience. So, with that being said, just quickly go over these three items. Is there anything that you're curious about into diving deeper, Kevin?
Well, awesome, Lily. Yeah, thanks for checking in. So I would love for you to tell me more about your thoughts and your critiques as you explore more of the Yelp ecosystem and app.
So, looking at the primary experience of restaurants, which was what they're known for, we have here the listings, we have the sponsorship at the very top, the navigation map at the very right. A huge part of the real estate is dedicated to showing you where the businesses are, and then we have the filters on the left for things like pricing, suggested, such as reservations, takeouts, delivery, and then different categories of food, and then different features such as what is new, what has outdoor seating, and then finally the distance. So we have a way for anyone to tailor their search from a broad level to all the way to the specifics of things like the dining experience or maybe even dietary restrictions. And looking at the overall page, I would say that there is a lot informationally that is happening. So at the very top, we have a search bar. Then we have different categories. And then with below that fold, we have the listings themselves that have sponsorships, and then the businesses listed one by one, and then we also have a filter based on how we want to show results, and then we have filters on the very left. So Yelp is definitely one of those businesses that are catered to a demographic of people that are probably used to using a lot of these products that are more informationally dense. So I would say that probably a lot of the users are more in like city concentrated areas, such as New York, San Francisco, LA. And the reason why I say this is because they are showing you a map where there's a lot of happening at once. So they have different pins at a specific location. And this is not possible if you're in a broad area where there's not a lot of businesses are bought in on Yelp. And then secondly, in order for this to be a successful model, you have to have a certain amount of clientele who are willing to not only eat at these places, but know how to upload reviews. So actually be able to sign up for accounts, willing to post their reviews, willing to navigate the entire product itself, and then become a Yelper in order for there to be shown on the other side different reviews. And then thirdly, there is a lot of tags information, and this is only possible if the buyers or the reviewers themselves provide all this information to either Yelp itself or maybe some participation from the business. But a lot of it, such as the photos, the testimonials about wait times, the maybe sometimes like if you want to know if there is a wait time or not, a lot of customers will provide that for the Yelp itself. Or, for example, if they are having a good experience and not all that requires the feedback and the experience of the users. So a lot of it is dependent on the supply or the people who are willing to provide this content. And I think a lot of that is reliant on the fact that people who are in target cities or majority of cities tend to be able to want to participate in this more. And I've noticed this as well is that when you go to more areas that are either more rural or maybe in other countries that don't use Yelp, there's basically nothing on the platform for users. So I think in terms of a business model, Yelp is definitely more concentrated in cities.
Sure, sure. And what
And
do you think are
yeah,
the goals of these users in the cities and when they're seeking to use something like Yelp?
I think people that are in cities are probably trying to evaluate the trade-offs of not only their cost of going to a business but also their time. So they are basically looking to maybe either like see evaluate if this opportunity makes sense for them, whether that is as a customer or as a as or actually as a customer in general. And I would say that the reason why they have reviews in the first place is to kind of have a social proof for the business that this is worth your time and money and whatever other costs as a customer, and that you are making the right decision by choosing this business. So it's both as social proof, but also as almost like de-risking the trade-off for the customer to want them to step into the business and engage.
Makes sense.
And in terms of, I think overall the information architecture, I mentioned this before that is quite informationally dense. I'd say that if this was redesigned, let's say in 2024 or in 2025, I think a lot of the filters would probably have to be reorganized or prioritized in some way with user research on does this make sense to have these filters shown up so high up in the hierarchy. So, for example, when we have the suggested times, we have offers delivery, we have offers takeout, offers online waitlist. Is there a way we can consolidate these suggestions or these options to really what matters the most to most users? So perhaps to most users, they really care about delivery and takeout. And do they really have to parse this information and then look through? It doesn't make sense to select online waitlist or good for dinner. Like, what does that exactly mean? And then this is a common theme that also happens in the other categories as well. So even for features, for example, we have things like dogs allowed or good for groups or good for kids. And then we have see all, which is like the entire list of different features that a listing could have. So if they were to redesign this, can they service this at a high level where they can maybe integrate this in the actual listing itself? And then could they reprioritize this list to be something similar to this, where we are only showing the key, most important, maybe even tabs or maybe selections, and then having the list overall just be more consolidated. So, for example, when we're looking at filters itself, can this be a more simplified selection where it's maybe already pre-selected based on maybe common searches in this area? And then for the actual selections itself, can it be used different patterns? For example, tabs with icons, or maybe maybe instead of checklists, maybe they can have for example, like actual selections within the map itself. So, for example, for the distance, can they have this over here to the map area itself instead of it being everything in one list of all these choices you can make at once? So to redesign this informationally, I think it would make more sense to have it not only simplified, but spread out through where when users are looking through the listings, they're able to make selections here without having to look left and then right at the same time. And then another, I think if I were to redesign this in 2024, another thing I would probably focus on is can we actually integrate a little bit better in terms of the map and the listing itself. So instead of it being the listings in the middle, where now they are kind of in this own little island, and then you have to look on the right with the map, is there a way we can make this where we can have different views, where if the user wants to just look at listings, then we provide as much information as we can on this one listing. But if they want to do compare and contrast, for example, maybe there's a setting up here that says like, I want to compare and contrast this on the map, then they can maybe select that, and then maybe a view with just the map and the listings would be shown. And then if they wanted to be more advanced and maybe more customization, maybe they can set up some kind of like advanced customization. And then that could be a way that it's saved every time they come back, they search. That would be one of the custom searches that is shown. I think right now for Yelp, when you search something, every time that you search something new, you would have to essentially re-input all the filters. And I think if the purpose of this is to save work and allow users to make an easier choice, then that would make a lot more sense for them to have some kind of way to save those searches, sort of like what Craigslist does when you search for housing or different places or items and things like that.
Got it. Got it. That's clear. And thanks for diving into the information architecture and mentioning a few things that you would improve as well. Specifically in the search experience, I know you're going through a high level overview, but how do you think about critiquing the map experience?
When you mean the map experience, do you mean just overall, or do you mean anything specific about the map experience?
Just like if when interacting with a map on the right hand side or expanding it, would just love your thoughts diving deeper into that particular flow.
I think in terms of the map itself, if I were to redesign this, maybe for easier usability, it sounds like to navigate the map itself, I would probably have the items be shown as a small preview instead of a large preview that pops up and hides everything when you're hovering over the item. So, for example, if I'm looking through two really tightly placed items, let's say 4 and 10 were like right next to each other, it can be really hard to actually navigate between the two. And then because of the large preview, you might miss something that's behind the 10 or 4. So maybe there can be a way where there's a small hover preview, and then the pop-up would appear at the very bottom instead of the top, because then it's hiding what is behind this item. And when it appears at the bottom, also it makes it easier for you to navigate through different listings without interfering with the overall experience. So that would be one suggestion that I would do if I were to work on this project as a designer. And then the second suggestion was the small preview so that they can see what they're hovering over before having to go into this large preview mode.
Okay. And how would you be like making these decisions or suggestions? Like, tell me more about your basis behind why you're recommending these changes.
Yeah, so what I'm thinking of is, I mentioned before, is the large preview blocks out the ability for the user to interact with the rest of the map. So this almost itself is almost like a persistent pop-up unless you hover off of it. So it blocks everything that is behind this because it is taking up in terms of hierarchy like in terms of importance of information hierarchy. When you hover over this becomes the most important item, but the intent of the user may be that they just want to casually browse through all the different listings. They're not looking to commit to look at one single preview pop-up. So that's why I was suggesting that a smaller pop-up that could maybe hover here could make more sense, because now they're not really committing to having to click through this the item or even look at the photo. Maybe they just want to know what this restaurant is called. And maybe that's at the level they're at in terms of making decisions. And then when they want to actually see the entire listing, then maybe they can click into it and then it could be shown at the bottom as a larger preview. And if they want to go into the business, they can then click into it and it will lead them to a separate page. So I think in terms of what I was suggesting, a lot of it has to do with the navigation, and in terms of what the user's looking to do at this point in time is not maybe necessarily making a decision where to eat or see a big picture of what the food looks like, but more like what is this restaurant even about? Like what is the name of it?
Awesome, Lily. Yeah, thanks so much for your thoughts on the map experience. So tell me more about if you were the actual product designer at Yelp owning this feature, then how would you think about implementing some of the changes that you recommended?
One of the approaches I typically like to do is I first like to collaborate with my PM in terms of what we could align these design decisions and align it with the business decisions that make sense. So ideally, there would be some kind of business initiative that would make sense for redesigning the map. And if that was aligned, then I would usually do some kind of lo-fi preliminary explorations around what this could potentially look like, and then work with user research early. So, for example, what I mentioned before about the small preview, maybe we can design a small kind of study group where we have these small previews shown up and it's some kind of very simple prototype. And then we can see based on how the users in that group are interacting with the prototype, if it makes sense to them, how it works. So when they're hovering over these different items and then they are able to see the restaurants and then click into it, does this make sense in terms of when they're looking at a map, how it works as expected? And is this something that is better than the current experience? So we would have a different study group, maybe with the control or user testing session, and then a different user testing session with the variants that I discussed in terms of the designs I would be showing from my side. And then in regards to the business metrics, I think what would make sense here is this has actually helped conversions of people maybe either visiting the business, starting an order, or maybe even people who are clicking into these listings themselves. So would this make it that there would be more clicks on this page overall because people are now able to see more listings at once instead of a large preview at once? Maybe because they have a way to kind of quickly snapshot into different listings. Maybe this is a way for them to want to click into that, and then they would have some kind of small preview here instead of having go into another page. Maybe that would incentivize them to have more clicks because now they don't have to pull up another page and then come back to this view and then like do it all over again. And then another point could be that is this part of the experience getting more engagement overall? So would that be a way that we can measure for success? Because if we launch this, let's say test it for 2 months, are we going to see more views and more engagement here in this area and the surface area overall? Those would be some ways I would think about testing for success from the business side. And then from the user research side, I mentioned of engaging with user research and doing user testing sessions with the control and the variants.
Okay, awesome. And how do you think about collaborating with product managers and engineers as part of this process?
Mm-hmm. So that's a great question. I think typically I mentioned before that I try to align with my product managers first. So I try to understand in terms of the business incentives if there's a way that we can make this mutually aligned so that we are able to propose this to leadership and hopefully get buy-in from there. And then in terms of the engineering side, I would say that a lot of it is involving them early in the designs themselves. So showing them the explorations, showing them the work, keeping them updated on the user research. And then I think throughout the process, engineers will inform it, for example, if something is not possible, like we can't do the small preview because we have this oh, if we do something like this, it's going to stretch out the time on this project by like 1 month. Or if we were to introduce this new component, it would unfortunately not work because we would have to use this new component with another project, and then that would elongate the timeline for this project as well. So I think working with engineering early on with the design exploration usually helps. But I'd say overall, usually is in tandem with PM and engineering together in one room to kind of review these designs together.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for your thoughts, Lily, and we can take off our mock interview hats now and dive more into the feedback session. So first of all, I want to give you some space. How do you think that you did, and what self-reflection would you have?
Yeah, I think for just kind of like in kind of impromptu last minute sort of review, I think I did okay overall. And the hardest part for me is always to try to add structure to something that is very ambiguous, very broad. So trying to add some kind of structure and narrow it down into what you want to talk about, because there's so many talking points of any product. There's always ways to improve. There's always ways that you can make any design change, and to decide on the best talking points and then structure that in a way that hits the points that you want to hit, but also communicates that to the interviewer is really challenging.
Mhm.
And that's something that I usually try to prepare for beforehand. So if I have an interview, if I know the products I'll be doing, I usually will try to do some kind of prep or practice session run through so that I know at least these are the points that are interesting that I want to hit. So I think in terms of just a kind of impromptu last minute sort of review, I think this was okay overall. But if I were to do it again, I probably would add more structure, and then probably decide more on the maybe like going from a flow and then all the way to the end. For example, if someone's making a decision, how do they look at a listing and all the way to deciding when to eat? So the
Mhm.
entire user journey for that person.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, totally agree with you that structure can be difficult in these interviews, but definitely a must have. So, yeah, I thought you did a great job overall, Lily. So, some of the positives that I noticed, number one, at the beginning, you were really great at setting the context of the company and, what one comes to Yelp for, some of the limitations and some of the strengths of the app as well. I also love that you were relatively structured, at least in the critique portion of the interview, like actually looking at the app and seeing what could be improved, right? You brought in a bunch of different concepts, demonstrating your ability as a designer, right? So information architecture, discoverability, usability principles, etc. I like that you had these umbrellas that you would critique the app under. And then finally, I thought you demonstrated a relatively strong business intuition, which is also great for a PD to have, right? So for you mentioned more users in urban areas rather than in rural, and also as part of the context setting in the beginning, that's definitely a great technique to show me you understand why Yelp exists, why it's been successful, and who is using it. So I thought those were all really great points in your favor. But some things that you could have improved on was, to your point, I think the overall structure could have been stronger, right? So lay it out in the beginning how you're going to tackle this app critique, and then so I can follow along and make sure that I'm meeting you at your different checkpoints, right? Maybe you wanted to start broad to understand. You could have said, "Hey, I want to understand the mission of the company and some more business objectives, and just give you some context on Yelp." Then I'm going to dive into some of the key users that I would love to explore through the lens of, and then finally we're going to pick an experience, let's say search, and then dive in deep and let me give you my thoughts there. I think that could have been really powerful at the beginning to just bring some structure and clarity around the whole interview. And then another thing is just to bring in some more justification on some of the points you talk about, right? So I think from a common sense perspective, a lot of things you mentioned did make sense, right? Like when we talk about the image and map relative to the other important information. But I think if you're able to orient around something more concrete, right? So the business goals that you establish up front, maybe that, search is the bread and butter experience of Yelp, that's their core user flow, or maybe saying something like, hey, I've seen in past research at XYZ stats around people are more visual than, people like images or people like to interact with maps in XYZ ways. I think bringing in some objective data or telling me how you would find it would anchor your answers much stronger. And then the final point is I think that when you are excited and when you are when you are critiquing the app you've already used, there lends to that natural excitement that you bring into an interview. And so I think remembering that when you enjoy an interview and can demonstrate that, it's very infectious for the interviewer on the other side and shows your love of product design, apps, technology overall. So that's the final thing I would recommend. But overall, I thought it was a really strong performance. Well, thanks so much for answering the question today, Lily, and thank you to everyone watching. If you enjoyed this interview, visit tryexponent.com to view our product design interview course, where you'll have access to our library of interview questions, expert coaching, and peer-to-peer mock interviews where you can practice yourself. Good luck on your next interview, and thanks for watching.